Hi listeners and welcome to another Footnote episode of the Fantasy Animation Podcast with me, Chris Holliday.
And me, Alex Sargent.
For this episode we are, I suppose, bouncing off of our K-pop episode, but also thinking about the current state of play landscape of animation. We're doing Netflix, and I think we were just debating this before. Netflix as a term could be taken in a few different ways. So we could talk about Netflix animation studios, but there's something else going on here. So it's algorithms, it's taste making.
I guess the kind of fundamental question we should start with, and I'm just going to start by starting the timer.
Sure.
10 minutes on Netflix,
Thank
off we
you.
go. What does Netflix change in terms of the landscape of film, animation, fantasy, the kind of things we talk about? So it's been around for nearly 20 years or so now. What does Netflix embody or represent that's different about the infrastructure of film and television distribution, production, all these sort of things that represents some kind of rupture from what came before it? And this is always an interesting question to poke at. Particularly as it's becoming quite an historical question, because obviously now we're teaching students who are just raised on Netflix. Now it almost needs to be about explaining how it used to be, right, rather than how it is now.
So I mean, first of all, so Netflix, as you say, it was founded in 1997. So we are dealing with sort of 2 decades, 3 decades actually, 3 decades of what and how Netflix has changed in terms of streaming. So there's lots of scholarship on sort of the streaming wars and different platforms and different ways of consuming media. And actually, I think the answer to your question is the crux of Matthias Frei's book called Netflix Recommends, where he basically argues that actually it's not new that Netflix, the way that kind of Netflix's recommendation system, the way that kind of the algorithmic nature of the platform, and the way that you watch something, you like something else, algorithmic culture, it's about this kind of politics of personalization, whether it's Spotify, whether it's Netflix, whether it's whatever, Amazon, it's you've watched this, you might also like this. So it's in dialogue with you, it forms you as a subject, but it also you are authoring this sort of way of watching. You are creating of what television scholars call a viewing strip.
Yeah, I think when I explain this to students, one of the things that I try to highlight to them is obviously Netflix started as a DVD rental company.
Good times.
If people don't remember this or are too young to remember this, you would literally sign up on a website, build a list of DVDs you wanted to watch, and they would send you it in the post.
Yeah.
And you'd watch it, keep it as long as you want, and then send it back in the post. They'd send you a new one on a subscription model. Now, when they did that, and I'm having to use these numbers off the top of my head here, so I could be wrong, but it's something like they boasted that they had an archive of over 70,000 films. So the whole point of it was it's a way of accessing, your local Blockbuster, because they existed then, has at best a couple of hundred movies in stock. We have 70,000. So it was all about the depth of the archive that you could access. And it was about building your own unique list, and you could literally, there was a search function, you added these films like you might add on your Amazon shopping list, and that was it. Now Netflix don't tell you how much they've got on their archive at the moment, and it's all very localized and regionalized and complicated, so the numbers are a little bit guesswork, but the best estimate is somewhere in the region of about 15,000. So any one Netflix account can access somewhere in the region of 10 to 15,000 items.
Yep.
And bear in mind that this is items also produced since, that's in the last 20 years as well, right?
Yeah.
So the number's gone down dramatically, and content creation has gone up dramatically.
Yes.
And the reason they do that, right, is, the reason they can do that is because that's not what you do on Netflix anymore, is it? You don't have a big search bar like you do on Amazon. The search bar is right up in the corner of the thing. It's really difficult to use. No one uses it. If you do use it, you start to realize what's not on there. What it is recommended for you, as you said. It's shifted from a model of depth of archive to a model where supposedly they are curating the best content for you. What that actually means, though, is that they want to keep the amount of content low because server data, That's what their running costs are. So the less content they have, and the more they make you can think that they've curated it especially for you, the better. And that's why they rely on all these kind of algorithmic data sets, because they can produce content that effectively captures their target audience and also make it seem like they're offering everyone the world, even though they're offering less and less of it.
So yes, and the kind of the algorithmic power. So again, a number of scholars have written about algorithmic interpellation, the way that you are kind of positioned into knowledge, and whether that's a Google search bar or search engine. Books that are called things like Machine Vision and How Algorithms Shape the World. And as scholars also talk about, they shape the world, but they often do so in uneven and unequal ways. With regards to taste making, so Fry's book is all about kind of taste making, categorisation. So the
key thing is that they are asking their viewers to participate actively in the idea that this is for them, and that's how they make the taste, right? Rather than give you all the taste you might want, all the flavours of the world, it's much cheaper and more effective for them to make the taste instead, and then you buy it.
Yes, and the extra thing is that your role in this is also very small. So the assumption is that you are the one that is authoring through these algorithmic.
Yeah. This is curated for you,
yes.
but oddly everyone's got the same stuff.
Yeah, and also what Netflix is telling you is most popular there's no reason why that need be true at all.
Yes.
Maybe it's the least popular, and by Jove, it needs some numbers and needs to get some kind of visibility. What's interesting about the Netflix Recommends book is exactly what you were saying, is that part of the aim is to Fry's aim is to counter this idea that its recommendation system that is rooted in these algorithmic structures, actually this algorithmic culture is only intensifying the way that gatekeeping has always worked, that recommendation systems have always worked in the past. So, and there's a couple of other books as well that I'll mention towards the end, but this is always the test with digital culture. It's narratives of loss and gain. What's being renewed, what's being replaced, what's being challenged, what's being,
I guess you could argue, the antecedents of all this would be something like, market research, Hollywood's audience surveys.
Focus groups.
They've been doing that since the classical age and before, right? Is the idea of making films in response to data being given by audiences. I guess the difference is the data is so much bigger now, and they have AI-enabled servers and systems to help make that selection process for them or with them.
Yeah, what you were talking reminded me of the giddy days of Love Film, which has obviously now been
similar kind of British thing. Netflix. Wasn't it? You didn't have Netflix here. Some people did, but really it was Love Film.
Yeah, but then that was bought out by kind of Prime. So we've got these main players. We've got Netflix. We've got Prime Video, and then of course we've kind of talked a bit about Spotify. And there's a great article by Jack Webster on kind of the politics of personalisation, which is it's about taste making, but he also talks about kind of prestige and the way that you're supposed to form the content. The content forms you, and you become this. You're in this reciprocal relationship with the content. The word content obviously is a word that perhaps didn't exist 20 years ago, but it is now a word that exists. But also a lot of this work seems to be exactly what you've done, kind of puncturing through this illusion of choice, and actually things are carefully curated and stage managed, and it's part of or it's placed perhaps in conversation with stuff like hashtag culture and sort of echo chambers when it comes to social media, and that you'll be given this unfiltered access, but actually you're being interpellated or positioned into a way of seeing the world, and your knowledge of content is partial under the illusion of curation.
Yeah, it's like when Coke did that thing where you could buy your name on a can of Coke. Like you're just buying Coke. It's fine, but it feels like it's your Coke. Very quickly, because we've only got a couple of minutes left. Let's talk quickly about the role animation and fantasy play into this. So animation is a key part of this strategy. Why? How is it?
So I think there are two things. One is the Netflix animation studio, so a subsidiary of Netflix that wasn't formed that long ago, less than 10 years ago, and produces its own original content. So Klaus, the Willoughbys, Wendell and Wild, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, which is obviously something that we've done already. So there's not that many feature films, but it's sort of one of those emerging, I guess, quote unquote, studios that is part of the landscape of contemporary animation and production. I would also add that one of the other things, and this is something that we've talked about actually in relation to kind of libraries, which is the way that animation is curated and positioned actually as a genre. So one of the interesting things, obviously what the Fancy Animation book was about, and the idea of where you put something tells us animation is, animation scholarship tells us that animation is not a genre. fine. Everything else, the current media jungle tells us that it is a genre because it behaves like a genre in a library on Amazon and on Netflix. So we've got animation being produced by Netflix animation studios. I think 18, 19 feature films, something like that, and TV shows. But equally, that part of the making, the curation of animation on Netflix is doing a lot of providing grist for the mill with regards to animation's potential generic status. And animation is obviously highly lucrative, and it appears in things for children on Netflix. Yeah. But fantasy operating the same way?
Fantasy we could talk about more broadly with streaming culture in relation to this, fantasy is very good at creating worlds.
Yeah.
One of the things that obviously shifts with this model is that it's about the subscription numbers rather than the watching of any particular program. It's companies like Netflix find IPs like Star Wars, Lord of the Rings very attractive because they offer long-term security, right? Come to us, we've got the Star Wars stuff. Come to Disney Plus. Now, obviously, oddly, Netflix haven't quite embarked on this model yet.
Yeah.
A lot of their fantasy shows are either quite like intrusive fantasies, like Lucifer was a Netflix thing, or at least it's very well watched on Netflix. The Vampire Diaries is a big thing on Netflix. I think it was made for one of the American networks, but it's been kind of co-opted by Netflix. And then, of course, things like Wednesday.
Yes,
but which is based on a kind of that kind of the role of nostalgia as well is very interesting to talk about if we had more time with Netflix. Others, Amazon Prime obviously have their Lord of the Rings and Wheel of Time. Disney Plus have their Star Warses, right? So
Marvels,
fantasy and Marvel, of course, Marvel, yeah. So like fantasy's role as a world building vehicle it seems quite useful to this, but I think the dust hasn't quite settled on exactly how symbiotic that can be. Because there's been obviously some high-profile flops in this respect.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. A quick rundown of a couple of sources. So I've mentioned Matthias Frei's book, Netflix Recommends Algorithms, Film Choice, and the History of Taste. I'd add Amanda D. Lotz's book, The Television Will Be Revolutionized, and her book, Netflix and Streaming Video. And then quick shout-out to one of my colleagues, Kit Bradbury Rants, an article, Unique Joy, Netflix Pleasure, and the Shaping of Queer Taste, which is kind of about algorithmic kind of positioning and what that means for queer content. Actually, is it something that should have its own category, or is it something that should be dispersed across categories? I think they're asking similar questions that we've asked about animation and fantasy. That's.
I don't think I mentioned The Witcher when I talked about Netflix. So I'm just going to mention The Witcher.
Okay, we'll cut that in. Make sure that people know about The Witcher. So there's lots of stuff on algorithms, on machine vision, and there's also another colleague, Daniel Harris Chavez, that talks about how algorithms are basically related to sort of the way that we watch films and kind of doing eye tracking and stuff like that. So lots of the idea of algorithms relates to Netflix, as we've talked about here, but is sort of extending outwards, and probably in a few years' time we'll end up doing a footnote on that.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks for that, Chris. Thanks for listening, everyone, for the last year. We'll see you in October.
Bye.